We might get underway. In leading into this panel discussion, or this discussion, I have to freely acknowledge that I think I'm a bit of a chicken little on this subject, the subject of alcohol marketing and ABAC. But I consider it one of the very significant, almost existential issues that we have to grapple with. If we as the brewing industry want to get our message out, we need to be able to talk about ourselves. And there is a lot of pressure globally on the way that we do that. And that's why my next guest, Professor Michael Lavarch, who has been the chief adjudicator of the ABAC panel, and I always get this wrong, Michael, the Alcohol Beverages Advertising Code. It's a little bit like ATM.
Yes, it is.
ABAC Code. He is a former Commonwealth Attorney General and Professor Emeritus of Law at the Queensland University of Technology. He holds a bachelor's degree in law from QIT and has practiced as a solicitor prior to being elected to federal parliament in 1987. He has extensive career in the law and especially legal policy. Michael, what is the importance of the ABAC Code? Before we even start talking about labelling or anything like that, why does the ABAC Code exist?
Well, essentially, it's because alcohol isn't just another product. I mean, that's the starting point with it. There pretty well isn't a country on earth that doesn't obviously regulate alcohol. The consumption of alcohol has all sorts of public health or other public policy considerations about how alcohol is to be used or ideally used in the community. And part of, not necessarily the most important component of sort of public health and public policy settings around alcohol is around its marketing. So that's a component of it. So alcohol's not just another product. If it is misused, we all know this, it can cause great individual harm, it causes great social and economic harm for a country, and that's why there is controls over it. Marketing is one component of it. I mean, essentially what you see around the world is that there is some degree of regulation of alcohol marketing. I mean, there are some countries where marketing is not permitted per se. It's a nice clean system, no alcohol marketing. I think you'd struggle to find any country where there is complete laissez-faire, go your hardest in terms of marketing. But the idea of alcohol marketing controls or regulation is that alcohol as a product, its use is modelled responsibly in terms of its effects, and most particularly, and a very key focus of all alcohol marketing regimes, wherever you see them, is the concern that minors are not attracted to the product, and that obviously stems from well-recognised medical and other research and understandings that if people engage with alcohol too early in their lives, then the potential negative consequences for that individual are considerable. So, I mean, that's essentially the starting point. Alcohol is not simply another product. It does have serious consequences, and it needs to be taken seriously, obviously, in the terms of the way it's promoted and marketed, as well as other public policy settings around it.
I think when we see discussions about ABAC, particularly when certain judgments are made, there seems to be a very strong point of view that marketers' rights or marketers' ability to market is being taken away from them. From what I heard you just say, would the better way for us to be looking at it is that we are being given permission to market, but that is subject to limitations, as opposed to our unfettered ability to market is being somehow limited?
Yeah, look at that. That's, I think, a pretty good characterisation of it, Matt. I mean, there is a significant voice in Australia that advocate a whole lot more severe restrictions on the use and the availability the pricing and the promotion of alcohol. I mean, there is the position of the Australian Medical Association, a position of a whole range of other public health advocates are that there should be, much greater restrictions on the visibility, if you like, of alcohol, and that is coming from a public harm perspective. I mean, formal government policy is framed in terms of harm minimalisation. That is, that alcohol is a legal product. Adults should be able to make informed judgments about the use of the product, and as a legal product, it should be able to be marketed. But that the public policy settings around that recognise the harm that comes from it, and hence the restrictions, if you want to view them in that sense, is about harm minimisation, that people make informed choices about their own adult use of alcohol, but particularly there should be a concern around the use of alcohol by people under the age of 18.
And this is a good question for a former politician, I guess, because we do operate in a political environment. And we heard from Bernard Salt, talked about some of the significant political shifts that have been taking place in Australia. We've seen the rise of the Teal Independent, and they have an agenda about fast food, soft drink, and alcohol is on their radar as well. And should we as an industry be regarding them as a sympathetic ear to the medical lobby, for example, and being very mindful of the way that we present ourselves to the political
Look, alcohol it's an interesting, sort of dynamic at a political level, and as you say, I came from politics. In fact, I'm the grandfather of this scheme. I've been involved in ABAC pretty well since its establishment back in 1998, and that was, 2 years after I was the Attorney General and directly involved in the Parliament and party politics. The interesting dynamic about alcohol is it's had this potential to develop what I'd describe as sort of interesting or strange bedfellows. One of the illustrations of that prior to the Teals, there was a major parliamentary inquiry, for instance, done in the New South Wales Parliament a few years back, and the chief proponents of it in terms of looking at the marketing of alcohol in that state was Fred Nile, the most conservative sort of Christian outlook, and the New South Wales Greens up in their upper house. Now, if you ever get a public issue where there's a potential for an alliance between the Fred Niles of the world and the Lydia Thorpes or the Greens of the world, you know that you're operating in quite an interesting dynamic. And it's always been the issue is there's not been huge appetite on behalf of either the Labor Party or the Liberal National parties to move to a prohibition model around alcohol marketing. Now, that can always change, of course, but that's not been really on the agenda. But there's always been some potential for alcohol as a product and marketing as a subset of that to be almost like a trading point in terms of larger political debates. So if I need to get something through the upper house and I need Fred Nile in New South Wales to have voted for it and the Greens to have voted for it, what do they both want? Well, if they wanted greater restrictions on alcohol marketing, as a government, I might have thrown that into the pot. The Teals are a new dynamic into that equation. They represent this movement away from the sort of the established two-party system. They're a different voice and a different force. They're obviously very interested in the broader space of social good, be it on climate change, be it around gambling, advertising, which has been a particular issue, and alcohol can be sort of seen, and alcohol marketing in that same dynamic. Now, that message, if I was taking off my ABAC hat and sort of putting on my old politician's hat, is that the industry needs to be, number one, very sensitive to this, and number two, be a leader, not a laggard, in terms of understanding that dynamic in terms of how they respond in the engagement that they take. And that's why ABAC, which is a industry-led initiative, ABAC is not the sole controller of alcohol marketing in Australia. I mean, each of the states have marketing guidelines and plenary powers in terms of their licensing regimes to be all over alcohol marketing if they so chose. They haven't. Their priority is on-premise responsible service of alcohol, primarily is where their regulatory focus in this space goes. But there is no sort of constitutional other restriction on the states, for instance, taking a much more active role in alcohol marketing. It is for industry to essentially be in a space to convince government and the broader community that there is no need for that. Industry sees the responsibility, understands the importance of sensible structures around its marketing, and is able to, in effect, self-regulate effectively to meet community concerns.
You've actually answered my next two questions, so which is perfect. So we might move on to the code in that case, and particularly as of 1 August, we saw some new amendments, or some new provisions come in. Maybe you can talk us about the new provisions and the tightened provisions, particularly around zero alc, and also the depiction of the responsible use of alcohol.
Sure. So, I mean, the ABAC Code, the actual standards in the code have generally been reviewed, probably every 5 or 7 years since the scheme first came into operation in 1988. So the review that was conducted last year and into the first half of this year is the first substantive look at the totality of the best practice standards since 2017, and that's when the placement rules came in, which we might talk about because it's a lot of issue around age gating and controls around social media and the like. So those requirements came in 2017, and this has been the first watershed review since then. And essentially, the core elements of the system remain in terms of what are responsible standards in terms of the depiction of alcohol and how it's sold. A couple of the changes that, however, are significant and should be noted. You just sort of mentioned probably the most important one, and that is the extension of the coverage of the scheme more directly to the sale of what the code describes as alcohol alternatives. So essentially, zero alcohol products that are styled as alcohol, your Carlton Zeros and your Heineken Zeros and Heaps Normal and a whole range of products obviously in that market. The same with wines and spirits and the like. It's been quite a growth area of the market, and some people in this room may well be dabbling already in that side of the market. Essentially what the extension of the system means that there's a responsibility to make it clear that a punter seeing a piece of marketing would be able to absorb from the marketing that it is a alcohol alternative, a zero alcohol product that is being marketed. So is it clearly being identified that it is a zero alcohol? If the answer to that is yes, then the only part of the code that sort of comes into play is that those products are not to be marketed to under 18-year-olds. They're not to have strong or evident appeal to under 18-year-olds. If it's not clear that the product is indeed zero alcohol, and a punter that's looking at the piece of marketing could think this is just a stock standard alcoholic beer, for instance, then the full suite of code standards apply to it. So it's an important extension. It's again fairly consistent with what we've seen occurring in other jurisdictions, other global markets as well. So that's an important change. The second important change is about the audience reach in terms of the placement of alcohol. At the moment, the older code had that you weren't able to place a marketing communication where it was reasonably expected that the audience of the communication was over 25% minors. So, don't place it with content or on a platform where it's likely to have a significant proportion of minors viewing or potentially viewing the piece of marketing. That 75% threshold from the 1st of January next year is rising to 80%. So it's a step up. Why? The most recent census shows a slight change in the demographic profile of the Australian population, so moving up to that 80% threshold. Our colleagues in New Zealand last year or so moved to an 80% threshold. And this is another example, I think, of industry, the industry-led scheme saying, well, let's get ahead of this. Let's make this step, this slight tightening of the marketing requirement before we're pushed into it through Teals or Greens or government taking some particular advocacy step. Let's get ahead of the game. So an 80% threshold in terms of your likely audience where your marketing is going. The third, I think, significant change is about the responsible depiction of alcohol. And this essentially is putting into the code the Australian alcohol guidelines, and that is about what actually amounts to excessive consumption, about more than 4 standard drinks in any one sort of drinking session, and the levels over a period of days. So they were always there as a backdrop to the code, but they're now being moved expressly into the body of the code. So there's some of the important changes in terms of the code for people to just keep their eyes on.
One of the things I really wanted to drill down to is the idea of marketing not having a strong appeal to minors. Again, because of the discussion that takes place when we report on some of the judgments, having a strong or evident appeal to minors doesn't mean that the ad is targeted to minors. Is that correct? It's just that it's something that could be seen by an objective test as being attractive to minors. Can you talk us through that and why that matters?
Okay. Essentially, this is the standard in the code that does most work. Most public complaints, the largest body of public complaints that come in to the ABAC scheme raise the potential for a piece of marketing to strongly appeal to under 18-year-olds. When ABAC does community research, which it does every couple of years or so in terms of where community attitudes are at, invariably, yes, the community will say, what's your greatest concern about alcohol marketing? It's about alcohol marketing sort of intersecting with children. So it comes through that. It'll be very much in sort of the Teals or other public policy settings. So that is why this is an important area. In my years of being doing this job, I don't think I've ever walked away with an opinion that a given marketer, that a given company has deliberately said, I want to make sure that I'm appealing my product to 15-year-olds, that I'm trying to, get 15-year-olds or grow my next generation of drinkers. I've never had that view. But what you do get, as you've indicated, Matt, is potential sort of spillover. And it's most problematic, really, if I'm sort of saying, well, my target market is 18 to 24-year-olds, or if I'm down that end of younger adult drinkers. And it's a devil's own time in terms of judgment, trying to distinguish what would sort of reasonably appeal to a 19 or 20-year-old and say, well, does that also have strong appeal to a 16-year-old? That's hard judgment stuff, and that's often where my panel agonises the most, and I know the pre-vetters in giving their advice will often agonise most about it, and it's where we can have the tension between the intention of the marketer and who they're trying to sell to, so what the marketer has in their mind, and then what the test that we apply is not your intention, is what would an average punter in the street, what would they take, and what would a potential 16 or 17-year-old take from viewing that piece of marketing. So that's where the issues arise. Now, to help us with that, we've also over time commissioned youth-focused research in terms of what does actually appeal to minors and what doesn't appeal to minors, both broadly, across brands, not simply alcohol, but then specifically also in terms of alcohol marketing. And if you ever look at on the ABAC website or look at the resources there, you'll see there is quite an amount of information which tries to give as much guidance as we reasonably can in terms of making this judgment. So this is around the content of the marketing. The other issue, and this is very live as I understand it with our colleagues in Parliament at the moment, is that then irrespective of the content of a piece of marketing is where it is being directed, where it's being placed. And really the live game here is around social media. How effective is age gating? How well is age gating being adopted? How does age gating interact with social media influences? How do we make that system as effective as possible? And how does that intersect with the actual practices and positions that the big platforms, the Metas and the Googles et al. Are taking in the way that they view their social and corporate responsibility. So this is really quite an interesting thing where I think we might see some further changes sort of emanate over the next few years.
One of the areas that we see that as the creativity and the fun side of the craft brewing industry, we've seen a lot of products created to play to our sense of nostalgia, to our younger selves, but targeted at, I'm 53, and there's a whole lot of products that remind me of my youth, but they're clearly targeted at my adult nostalgia.
Yeah.
But is that also part of the problem? Because the things that I'm nostalgic about were the things that appealed to me when I was young, almost a child. And so even though it's not directed at that, is that where the evident appeal or the strong appeal can come, even if it's not an intentional appeal?
Yeah, I mean, nostalgia is a good illustration of sometimes where people can come unintentionally a cropper, and you see it around particular, flavour profiles. I mean, ABAC doesn't, purport to regulate your physical product, your flavour, your alcohol content and the like. I mean, to the extent those things are regulated, they're regulated directly by government. We're regulating your branding and packaging, and we'll then regulate individual marketing executions, be it a social media post or a billboard or whatever it might be. And we've on occasions come across marketers who are sort of saying, this invokes memories of you going to the Brisbane exhibition and having a toffee apple or some fairy floss and
strawberry sundae.
Strawberry sundae, as you know from your work over the last week. So I'm sort of harking back to that era, and my marketing is, in my mind, very much trying to appeal to that nostalgia, a period of a past time. I'm now 53 and I'm thinking back. No doubt very genuinely the motivation, but where the issue is, some things that appealed to you when you were 17 or at that stage of your life are still appealing to a 17-year-old today. People are still buying toffee apples and strawberry sundaes and grape bubble gum and the like now. Nostalgia in another way can be perfectly right. It's horses for courses. If I'm talking about an artist or a musician who was, popular with me when I was 18, you can be pretty confident that person's going to have next to no appeal to a 16-year-old now, that it's going to look at your bloody grandpa, what do you want about? So obviously nostalgia does have its place. It's a legitimate area for marketing to go to, but just be obviously sensitive that nostalgia can still mean that suddenly if something was popular when you were 18, at what point did it stop being popular to a 16-year-old? Was it 1987? Was it 1997? Things can still have very enduring popularity.
I'm interested, you just said that it's not ABAC's role to judge flavour or flavour profiles or product. Is there a risk that if there is too much momentum about marketing or about if there is too much negative perception about some of the products that are out there and the way that they're marketed, that there could be pressure to actually regulate the product themselves, not just the marketing of them?
Look at that. That's. There's a whole range of factors, obviously, in play as to why a particular product might have a popularity with a particular demographic. Price is obviously a key point. The flavour profile will be a key point. There's a whole range of factors. Marketing is but one, and ABAC never pretends to get into spaces other than particular points around the marketing of a product. But I can't talk about the detail of it, but obviously you'd be living under a rock if you weren't conscious of hard solo. Getting a bit of play over recent weeks, and that is a live complaint before my panel at the moment, so I can't prejudge it or give you too many insights into it. But that is an illustration, really, of a product area where it's a combination of nostalgia, established brand, crossover between a soft drink brand into an alcohol brand, price issues, flavour issues, and then branding and marketing issues. And if industry, collectively, including ABAC, but obviously industry itself, doesn't, act with its antenna up about that, there is potential for there to be, aha moments in terms of, critiques, and criticisms of industry and its approach here, and, a front door in terms of, here is a need for much more restrictive, direct or outright prohibition actions on behalf of government in terms of, notionally protecting the broader public good.
I'm just very conscious of time, so I might throw the panel open to any questions. Does anyone have any specific questions about ABAC that you would like addressed, pre-vetting the code itself? I might just repeat it into the microphone so we've got it for the recording. The question was, how do you decide whether it's targeted at children, with specific reference to Captain Morgan, the rum brand?
Yeah, I mean, look, Captain Morgan's going to have sort of a broad sort of way, a sort of a Pirates of the Caribbean sort of character, all up in the fancy dress sense. Good question. Look, this is by far and away, as I say, probably the most difficult judgments that both marketers, pre-vetters in terms of the ABAC scheme, and then the complaints panel need in terms of something comes our way in terms of generating a public complaint. It is a challenging space where reasonable minds could differ. The classic 10 people in a room, 6 think it's okay, and 4 think that's not really responsible. The tests that we apply, our starting point, I mean, what do we think is going to be the probable understanding of that marketing item by the so-called reasonable person? And the reasonable person is this mythical creature of, having the standards and opinions and values you find commonly in a majority of the Australian community. So it's a reason, it's easy to say, it's harder to actually find such a typical person, but that's what is the judgment we're trying to place. And it's unusual that I would find a piece of marketing that I'd say has gone about and targeted under 18-year-olds. It won't fall within that limb generally of the test. It'll be more likely to fall in that it has a greater appeal for minors than it does for sort of the broader adult population. It's more likely to fall into that category. What do we then look at? We then will look at obviously the issues of the overall design. Is there clarity that the product being marketed is indeed alcohol? Is there potential for confusion with a soft drink or confectionery or some other element like that? Is the colour scheme and the messaging mature in its overall impact? Are bright contrasting colours being used? What language is being used, if it's got text or content in it? Are there other imagery being used which is relating to well recognised pursuits of children as opposed to adults? I mean, look, it's very difficult to answer. Obviously, that each one is looked at its own merits. You can look through to some extent a bit of a checklist of thought prompters, but it isn't a checklist exercise. It is, you don't say, well, it's got 3 of these characteristics, hit it on the head. It doesn't work like that. It is, you get some thought prompters of what you might look at. We always try as much as possible to be consistent. We'll look at if there has been anything similar in the past, how that one's been decided, but ultimately to step back and say, what is its overall impact and what do we think its probable understanding it is? What's not relevant is your intention in marketing. It's not what you were trying to do with it, it is how the community member would understand it. So your intention is informative in terms of where you're trying to take it, but it's not decisive. So it is undoubtedly the most challenging part of making judgments in terms of strong or evident appeal to minors. On that then, sorry, time for one question?
I had a question around the audience. You mentioned earlier it was if there was 25% were under the age of 18, that's where there would be some issues with marketing. How does that relate to sports marketing?
Well, I mean, look, it's good. So it's a question about the percentage rule and sports marketing. It's an interesting thing. I mean, so if you're on, say, for instance, you're in free-to-air television, you're able to place marketing with live sporting events, even though it might fall within a time zone that if it, was Days of Our Lives on or something, you're not able to have placed it. But if the Matildas are playing a game, boom, you can place the thing. So you're in the market, but if the audience of the Matildas game by where you've placed that ad, if you reasonably expect the audience of that at the moment to be more than 25% minors, then it's going to be a breach. From the 1st of January. It'll be if more than 20% of that audience is likely to be marketers. I mean, sport is relatively easy, I have to apply, because there is very good data, particularly in terms of broadcasts. I mean, you know what the tennis rates year in, year out. You know what Test cricket rates. You know what one-day internationals rate. You know what a rugby league match.
So
what an AFL match. So
what are the
you can
data?
predict.
What would the percentage?
But overwhelmingly, mainstream sports that I've just described then consistently rate 85 to 90% adult audiences. So it is, pretty safe. Where it can be a little bit more tricky is if it, what's the Barbie movie getting in terms of its appeal if I'm in cinema advertising, or Thor, God of Thunder, what's that audience going to be? Again, things that have good ratings or other data, that's okay. Where it can be more problematic for us if I'm on a YouTube channel. What is the likely audience around that? Now, our friends at the platforms, again, can give you pretty good, what they know about every individual in the country is bloody frightening, to be quite honest. But putting aside the privacy concerns about it, again, if they'll play ball and give you access to the data, you can sort of answer that. Now, it's not that you get pinged from you make the wrong judgment. If you've made your reasonably expected judgment based on what's available to you and what's reasonable, the fact that in the end it in fact got more than 25%, well, that won't be a breach, provided your starting point judgment was reasonable based on your available sort of data that you could base it on.
Thanks for the insights, Michael. It's been great. I think one recent example that probably the industry noted was the Hard Solo release, and I guess if that came before ABAC,
it's before me now. Yeah, it's before me now.
Before you now, and I guess one thing there is looking at the Solo. It's an interesting one where you've got a soft drink becoming an alcoholic drink, and not vice versa, but like a beer becoming an alcohol-free or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But if you've got Solo marketed as a soft drink, you could, on one hand, argue that it's targeted towards adults, but in terms of its placement, positioning, and retail, it's very heavily a soft drink marketed to children. How does that play in with a change of colour brand, but you're still, I guess, playing very strongly off a brand that is targeting children?
Watch this space because I have a complaint about it. In fact, I've got a number of complaints about it at the moment. We are working our way, and we'll soon have a panel hearing to determine it. So I can't, I can't prejudge it because I'd have to, bar myself from the decision making. We provide procedural fairness and the like. So I can't answer you specifically. Each of the points that you've raised will be very real considerations in terms of what's before it. We've had other examples. For instance, I don't know if anyone here from Four Pines, but a few years ago, Four Pines did a brand collaboration with Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream, and we did breach that product, the branding of that product. And the same sort of considerations that probably were in that judgment will somewhat come into play in this hard solo one. So, what is the branding, the reach, who's consuming Ben & Jerry's, is that adult, who has that, how much of that is minors, how well has the individual packaging design, separated it out from, in that case, the ice cream, branding and the like. So how successfully did they enable themselves to draw on the obviously brand collaboration, but distinguish it is indeed an alcohol product, then back to all those factors as to the imagery, the colour scheme, its overall impact. All of those sort of considerations will come into play, obviously, with hard solo. It will be a very much watched decision, obviously, so I'm going to be very thorough on it.
Yes, so will we at Brews News. Last question, and just because of time, and it's time for the lunch break. Michael, you've spoken very extensively about the level of judgment that's needed, the lack of very hard lines for people to cross. Alcohol marketing is clearly a minefield that we have to navigate. So to bring it to a close, what is your advice to alcohol marketers in terms of how they approach their marketing? What tips would you give?
Essentially, you take a risk management approach to it like you do to every other aspect of your business. You take a risk management approach. If I've got some core branding issue, it's probably safe in risk management terms to go to the pre-vetting service and get some advice on it. If I'm churning out bloody 100 social media posts a day, then it's not economic or sensible to be going to pre-vetting. So what is the value of what I'm working with? If I happen to be in a television space, I'm getting pre-vetting on it, given the investment in it and the like. Social media, a different category. There are pretty good resources on our website. There are training videos, there's checklists, there are all of the precedents of previous decisions. So again, how much investment and importance to me of what I'm doing, greater that is, the more risk management I do on it. If I personally think, I know what I'm trying to achieve here, but I reckon it's a bit out there or cutting edge or the like, as opposed to something stayed up and down, simply pricing information and the like. Well, you take a risk management approach to that, and you take a bit more care with it, and you might, again, if you're a little bit worried about it, and it depends on your own risk appetite, I'd go to pre-vetting and get some advice on it. So use the resources, apply the same prudent approach to your business as you do to other areas in terms of your marketing. When there's value involved, if you think there's something could damage your brand if it goes the wrong way, if you're worried about your reputation and the like, if you in terms of your social response, corporate responsibility space in terms of this could be at risk through that, then you take a bit of a higher level with it than some stock standard $6 per stubby type ad, or if it's just straight up and down like that. So that's essentially what my advice is.
Wonderful. Well, we might bring this session to a close. Hopefully it hasn't been too much eat your vegetables, even though this is as important as eating your vegetables. Big round of applause, and thank you very much for Michael for coming and joining us to take us through ABAC.